love Jesus, do me one quick favor before we start. Hit subscribe and leave a like. It means the world to this channel. Thank you. Now, the story. On the 2nd of October, 1942, this ship sliced a Royal Navy cruiser clean in half and was ordered not to stop. 239 men drowned in the water behind her, and Britain buried the story for the rest of the war. That's one night out of 31 years. There are others. In 1966, an 18-year-old crewman was crushed to death by a steel door in her engine room, and the staff who work here now say he never clocked off. Somewhere on B deck, there's a stateroom the hotel couldn't rent to anyone for 30 years. Because of what kept happening to the people who slept in it. And then there's the swimming pool. Drained for over 50 years, not one drop of water, and yet it's the single most reported room on the entire ship. The guards who walk these decks at 3 in the morning have stopped going down to it alone. They hear splashing in a room with no water. They hear a little girl laughing. And some mornings there are small, wet footprints on the dry tile, leading away from the deep end. Her name is the Queen Mary, once the most glamorous ship ever built, then a gray ghost of war, and by the end, an estimated 49 people had died aboard her. The tourists sleeping in her tonight think she's just a hotel. She is not just a hotel. She didn't start with a name. She started with a number, hull 534. The keel went down in 1930 at the John Brown shipyard on the River Clyde in Scotland. Cunard wanted the fastest, largest, most luxurious liner ever built, and then the money ran out. It was the Great Depression. For more than 2 years, hull 534 stood half-built and rusting over the town of Clydebank, while the men who had built her stood in the dole queues and watched. People later said the Queen Mary carried the weight of the men who made her. She was born out of hardship before she ever touched the water. The government finally stepped in on one condition. Cunard had to swallow its great rival, the White Star Line, the company that built the Titanic. So the ghost of one doomed ship helped pay for another the world would come to call haunted. In 1934, in front of 250,000 people, she was named and sent down the slipway, just over 1,000 feet long, 80,000 tons, 12 decks. And in May 1936, she slipped out of Southampton bound for New York, with the whole world watching. For the next 3 years, she was the most glamorous address on Earth that happened to move. To cross on the Queen Mary was to spend 5 days inside a luxury that's hard to imagine now. You dressed for dinner every night, an orchestra played, and the famous came aboard like it was a film premiere. Clark Gable, Greta Garbo, the Duke and Duchess of Windsor, Winston Churchill. She was fast, too. Fast enough to take the blue ribbon for the quickest crossing of the Atlantic. And 2 decks down sat her showpiece, a first-class swimming pool lined in mother-of-pearl and pale green tile, glowing like the inside of a shell. It was the most beautiful room on the ship. The second time her story comes back to that pool, it won't feel beautiful at all. There was a stateroom, too, cabin B340, utterly ordinary in 1936, that would change. But not before the world she was built for came to a sudden, total end. In September 1939, Britain went to war. When the war came, they stripped everything beautiful out of her. The chandeliers came down, the artwork went into crates, and the whole 1,000-foot hull was painted a dull camouflage gray. She stopped being a palace and became a troop ship, and the soldiers gave her a new name, the Gray Ghost. Her greatest weapon wasn't a gun, It was speed. She crossed alone and unescorted, zigzagging at full power, faster than any submarine could line up a shot. A ship built for 2,000 passengers now carried 15,000 soldiers at a time, and on one crossing, more than 16,000 people on a single voyage, the most ever carried on one ship in history. Hitler knew exactly what she was. He reportedly offered a fortune and the Iron Cross to any U-boat captain who could sink her. Nobody ever collected. Churchill himself crossed on her 3 times, under a false name, with the plans for the invasion of Europe locked in his cabin. But heroism on that scale is never clean. And one October night in 1942, the Grey Ghost did something the men aboard carried in silence for the rest of their lives. That night, the Queen Mary was coming in toward the coast of Ireland, carrying more than 10,000 American troops. The Royal Navy sent a cruiser to escort her the last stretch, a small ship called HMS Curacoa. Both vessels were doing exactly what they'd been told. The Queen Mary was zigzagging to throw off submarines. The Curaçao held a straighter course, but they were slowly converging, and each crew assumed the other would give way. Neither did. 80,000 tons of steel, moving at nearly 30 miles an hour, came around on a zigzag and struck the Curaçao amidships, cut the cruiser in 2. The liner was so vast that her own passengers felt only a long, dull shudder. Behind her, both halves of the Curaçao were already going down. Of a crew of 338, 239 were lost in minutes. And the Queen Mary did not stop. She couldn't. A troop ship carrying 10,000 men does not stop in submarine waters, not for anything. So she sailed on, while the men at her stern watched the survivors grow smaller and smaller. It was buried for the rest of the war. The families were simply told their sons were lost on active service, no ship named, no reason given. When the fighting stopped, the Queen Mary did one last extraordinary thing. She carried the brides home. Voyage after voyage of young European women who'd married American and Canadian servicemen, sailing toward countries they'd never seen, the corridors now full of prams and crying babies. Then they gave her back her chandeliers, and for a decade she was the grand liner again. But the world was moving faster than she could. In 1958, a passenger jet crossed the Atlantic in a matter of hours, and the 5-day crossing, that had been the height of glamour, was suddenly just slow. In 1967, she was retired. She sailed to her final home at Long Beach, California, was tied to her berth, and her engines were shut down for the last time. After 31 years and 1,000 crossings, the Queen Mary never moved again. And that's closer to where the strange part begins. Since the day she was tied up, the Queen Mary has become one of the most reported haunted places in America. And almost all of it gathers around the exact spots where her history turned dark. Begin with the swimming pool. It hasn't held water in decades, yet it's the single most reported location on the ship. Guests and staff describe the same things again and again. Wet footprints on dry tile. Women's laughter from an empty room. Apparitions of women in 1930s swimsuits standing on the staircase who are there, and then simply are not. And there's the girl the tours call Jackie, said to be a child who drowned in the pool area, a little girl's voice answering questions, singing even saying her own name in a room sealed off from the rest of the ship. Far below, in the engine rooms, there's a watertight door the crew numbered 13 on the 10th of July. 1966, an 18-year-old named John Petter was crushed there during a drill. Today, the security staff report a young man in blue overalls walking the length of Shaft Alley who vanishes at door 13. And then there's the room. For decades, B340 was the cabin the hotel wouldn't rent to anyone. Lights and taps turning themselves on and off. Bedclothes dragged away in the night, the weight of someone sitting on the end of the bed. They eventually locked it and left it empty. Today, it books up months in advance. So why this ship and not some other? Part of it is simple. The Queen Mary is real, and she's still here. You can't stand inside the Titanic, but you can stand at the edge of this pool. Sleep in B340 and put your hand on the same rails Churchill held. And the history is genuinely dark. An estimated 49 people died aboard her, and that's before you count the 239 men of the Curacoa. The staff have stopped arguing about whether she's haunted. They've made their peace with it. A guard who's walked her decks at 3 in the morning for 15 years doesn't need you to believe him. He just turns off the lights in the pool room, doesn't look back at the water, and goes home. She's still waiting, and the people who work aboard her will tell you she's not waiting alone. I'm Finley. If this story stayed with you, subscribe and leave a like. And if you love Jesus, let me know in the comments. The Queen Mary is only the first door. Sleep well, if you can.